And welcome back. If you guys want to go ahead and take your seats, and we can start with the panel, and I'll go ahead and introduce them. All right, so please welcome David Browning and our panelists.
Well, great. We're thrilled to be back here with you, and we've assembled a fabulous panel. And the overall theme is, okay, what's happening? What's about to happen? You know, we've had a lot of good things going on in Northeast Ohio, but what do we need to do in order to maintain it, sustain it, whatever? Because for so long we're focused on, okay, get through this RNC thing, and then we'll see what happens. So, the panel that we've pulled together today, and I'll introduce them alphabetically, then we've got a different order that we're going to present. And the format of this is each of the speakers has some prepared remarks, and then we'll go to question and answer after they present. So, alphabetically, Tony Coyne is with us. Thrilled to have him. President of Manser Gavin, a prominent law firm in downtown Cleveland. Tony's focus is on business and municipal law, zoning and planning, eminent domain, real property, and litigation. He's well known in this community and in the halls of Cleveland State University because after obtaining his BA from John Carroll, he then came here to CSU, obtained his MS from the Levin College of Urban Affairs, and then a JD from Cleveland Marshall School of Law. Besides his active law practice, however, Tony has been incredibly engaged in real estate and community affairs. He chaired the Cleveland Planning Commission for 15 years and then went on to lead the Group Plan Commission, which helped spearhead, among many things, the $50 million renovation and rejuvenation of Public Square. Next is Stephanie McHenry, who's the CFO and Senior Vice President of Business Affairs and Finance here at Cleveland State. But in doing some research on Stephanie, I couldn't help but come across a couple of articles. And the one, she was called the mayor of Cleveland State University. Well, why is that? It's because she oversees about everything from the dorms to security to dining to parking. And I guess, as she said, her quote is, she's responsible for everything that people enjoy and complain about. So she's got her hands full. And then as a real estate person, to put it in my perspective, 17,500 students, 85 acres of property, 5 million square feet of space, 1,000 residence halls, and 1,600 employees. So Stephanie has her hands full, and we look forward to hearing more from her. Her background, I thought, was very interesting and really fits not only to be on this panel because her Cleveland State involvement, but her background. She comes from Little Rock, Arkansas, graduated from Dartmouth College. It's just a great, wonderful spot. And then, lo and behold, she comes to Cleveland in 1984 as part of Shorebank and was involved in the Glenville Enterprise Center, which is something that I had touched back in the day. So literally, she's been involved and engaged in economic development at a grassroots level, which really applies to our topic. Next on the panel by alphabetized is Richie Paperinen, who's here at Cleveland State, Senior Research Associate at the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs. He focuses on migration, demography, culture, and community and economic development. In reading his material, I just was fascinated. He has wit and incredible insight and perspective in what's going on in the world and in our community. And obviously, Joe has referenced him, and we look forward to Richie will kind of kick off and kind of set the context for the panel. And then last but not least is my good friend, Alan Wyant. Alan is now the Vice President of Strategic Development for Playhouse Square Real Estate Services. For more than 30 years, he has been an outstanding commercial real estate broker and, most importantly, an industry leader. Alan has structured some of the most significant and creative transactions in this market over a very long period of time. He's very smart, very focused, very creative. Besides that success that he's had in brokerage, though, Alan really shares a passion for Cleveland and has given his time and talent in order to make our community a better place. I think Joe Marinucci had mentioned earlier about the creation of the 912 district. And Alan and I were just kind of mercenaries running about in downtown Cleveland, pointing out in 2008, 2009, what we saw as some impending problems. And we kind of put together a little presentation, took it to Joe, and the next thing you know, we were dancing all over town. Probably 50 or 60 various presentations that we made, and then ultimately the birth of the 912 district came out of that. And credit Alan, credit Joe, the DCA, and a lot of other people that made that a reality. But so we've got a great panel, and now we want to kick it off with Richie.
Thanks. When I think about Cleveland, we're economic restructuring. So we're going from heavy industry to a knowledge economy. I'd say we really started doing this in the 2000s. Pittsburgh did this in the 90s. Boston did it in the 80s. So real estate is really the lagging indicator. And demographics, economics are leading. So let's go through some slides. So this is what we call an ironic finding. This is rate of housing unit change for the 5-county region. You see what's going on? There's a convergence between the sprawl of the surrounding counties and the inner city. So quick data point, last 5 years, the city of Cleveland actually added housing units for the first time since the 1950s. The Cuyahoga County suburbs lost housing units for the first time in its history. So there's a flip going on. And it's a flip that's obviously not just Cleveland, but Cleveland's demographically converging with Chicago's and New York cities. So where is this housing unit change going on? It's largely the urban core. So this is a really interesting finding from a blog, the Transport Politique. They looked at population within 1.5 miles of City Hall, 1960 baseline. You can see Cleveland's almost about 70% of its baseline of population in the urban core. But you see how it's outperforming Columbus. Columbus is annexing and suburbanizing, and it's growing population. But its urban core development is really not the same as what's going on in Cleveland. So we're along the lines of Cleveland. We're doing the reverse of the donut hole. So in our world, the donut hole is the creeping of disinvestment from the core out, and now we're backfilling in investment, and that's people, and that's real estate appreciation, and that's housing units. So how far can we build out from the core out? Ohio City, Tremont, even Goodrich, Kirtland Park, it's all filling out. What does that look like? But it's important, this redevelopment in cities, it's not just about microbreweries and coffee shops, because $7 beers are expensive, and you better have a damn good job for them, right? So what's your macroeconomic underpinning? In Cleveland, we did a study for DCA. This is the industry breakdown for downtown residents. You can see healthcare is the big driver. So we call this the white coat industry. These are white coat workers, just like there was a white collar industry off of manufacturing. How do we build that out? And are these people going to live in the city like they have done in Boston and Pittsburgh? I'd say we better have the product. But this is the thing, macro always influences micro, always. This is an interesting map of college educational attainment. The black areas are those that are more college educated than the nation. Red are less college educated. You see in the bottom right, it's really the urban core that is attracting the college educated workers and university circle. Again, how far does this build out? What does the product look like? Is there a life cycle of housing? Is it just studios, 1-bedroom apartments? Or is there going to be condos, place for people to age in place? So again, to the macro picture, this is a very interesting finding. This is the 25 to 44-year-old folks in the labor force at the metro level, percent with an advanced degree. 20.3% of our young adult workers have an advanced degree in Cleveland. Out of the top 40 metros, that's fifth. That's a pretty astounding figure. Half of those people work in the eds and meds. To the extent they live in the city, it's a big question, and spoiler, they really don't, to the extent we would like them to. So I'm going to take these top 10 metros and give you another stat. Percent of core city young adults with a 4-year degree. So this is 25-34 and 35-44. Cleveland drops off the map here. So 23.6% of our young adults have a college degree. You look at Pittsburgh, you look at Seattle, you look at the list. Now this is a bad finding in one respect, but just look at what the growth of college-educated residents in the city has done to our landscape, but how far we can go as far as absorption. This is another map. We did a study of where do these young adults live in Cleveland. 25 to 34-year-olds with a college degree. The green dots are those individuals. You see Lakewood. There's a Crane's article, Lakewood's market is hot. That map shows why. But also, you got the urban core, you got Cleveland Heights, you got Shaker Heights, and you got University Circle. How do we extend that? How do we grow it? What product do we do that with? Okay, now we're just going to switch a few more slides. Real estate appreciation. This is 2015 values. So remember, economics, demographics, real estate. So now we're going to look at this lagging. Appreciation in the urban core, obviously, but you look what's going on along the health tech corridor. Look what's going on in Huff. These are really big areas for growth, I think, along the health tech corridor. Think about what Philly did around Penn, what Pittsburgh did around CMU and Pitt, what Baltimore did around Johns Hopkins. It's all right there, but how do we get everyone together to do it? This is a new study that's coming out, change in assessed values. You see the growth is in the core and University Circle. Those are your barbells of growth. In the middle, health tech corridor is a pinch area, last slide. And then you can see where the growth is going, where the change of appreciation is happening. IBM on 105th and Cedar, there's a new building there. That's a big deal. Is there going to be housing there for workers? That's something that, and then what happens? Is there land acquisition? Is there a plan to do this? So that's just a big overwrap, and then I'm going to pass it over to Tony.
Thank you, Richie. The Cleveland Planning Commission celebrated an event last year. It was 100 years old, and I had the privilege of serving on it for 25 years. And when I celebrated it at the Levin College of Urban Affairs, we recognized one thing, and Richie probably would appreciate this. The metropolitan area of Cleveland is actually fairly constant over the prior 50-year period, around 2 million or so people, the SMSA. So that was one constant statistical fact. The other constant statistical fact over that 50-year period was that Cleveland had not celebrated a major sports championship at that time. So I had to change my notes since it's all changed since then. But I spent a good period of time in the Planning Commission doing things that I think are benefiting our community collectively. In 25 years, we adopted the Civic Vision 2000 citywide plan. We adopted and created neighborhood design review regulations. We completed what the younger folks might not know, the dual hub corridor transportation plan, now more affectionately known as the Health Line. We also opened then Jacobs Field and the Gund Arena, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Science Center. We published a citywide residential design guideline plan for housing in the city. We also computerized our zoning map. That was a big deal. We were behind the times in that. And while we talk about housing units now, during Mayor White's term as mayor, and actually a good part of Mayor Campbell's, the city of Cleveland saw the construction of a couple thousand housing units, new housing units. Mill Creek development, a lot of infill housing in Ohio City, in Detroit Shoreway, and several neighborhoods saw that. Also, under Chris Ronane's leadership, we really reinvigorated focusing on our lakefront and a lakefront master plan, which maybe has been watered down to some degree, but is still being implemented. We also have the Shoreway under construction now. The Opportunity Corridor is certainly on its way, and we've leased the public former city parks, state parks, back to the metro parks. So all of these things collectively have sort of laid the table for us to start to do a lot of great things for our city and our region, and we have to build off of all those things. I've often said that in the past, when the convention center discussions were taking place, the folks that spoke against it were typically folks saying, you know, it's another one of those silver bullet projects. And I always felt that was wrong, in the sense that there is no silver bullet project to help our town become a much more vibrant economic place to work, live, and play. And the convention center is a good example of sort of a difficult spot for our city to be in. When we had the Convention Facilities Authority looking at the whether to do a convention facility or not under the Campbell administration originally, and frankly before that the White administration, the problem I always had with it was, well, what do we do if we don't reinvest in it? We've got a historic convention facility. We've got one that's completely underground. Now has the largest green roof in North America. What's the alternative plan? And you have to either reinvest in some of these public properties or not, and if you don't, you better be ready to pay the consequences of not reinvesting in them. So where we were kind of fortunate, in my view, was once we were able to really go into a partnership with the county on the convention facility infrastructure, it spread the risk of that project. But more importantly, with Mayor Jackson coming into office, when we had that opportunity presented that they were going to proceed with the convention center, I had met with him and I talked to him about seizing this as an opportunity to address some of our public space in downtown Cleveland, because it really had not been taken care of the way it should have been, nor was it programmed the way it should have been. So he agreed, and I'm a novice historian of Cleveland, having worked with Professor Campbell many years ago. So I knew all about the Group Plan Commission as a planning student here. So we kind of in a small way reinvigorated that and had the mayor reappoint new members to the Group Plan Commission. But our focus was different. It was about making the convention center project have a component that was about something that would help Clevelanders. If visitors to our town enjoy Public Square and enjoy the mall, that's great. But it's really about Clevelanders. So by doing that, by seizing that connection, we were able to generate interest and, frankly, try to champion public spaces in our downtown, which I think now are inspiring other development around our downtown and for people that come to our city. And I think that's very, very important. I don't think people look at Public Square some anyway, look at it as like a public park project. It's not. It's really an economic development project, and I think you're going to see the benefits of that. So as the discussion moves on, I just wanted to mention that these projects, these public space projects, even a little park in a neighborhood can inspire great things within that community, and it's very, very important for the whole community to recognize that. They're very, very important parts of our development for quality of life issues, which also inspire real estate development and improve property values.
Great. Alan?
Alan Wyant, Playhouse Square. I was asked to speak on a narrower subject, and Tony covering as many great things as he has championed. Most people think of Playhouse Square for the arts, obviously the Broadway and the shows, the comedians, the concerts, and all that we bring in. We have added over the years the mission of education and actually getting children into our theaters, giving them an opportunity to see shows and experiences that they would otherwise never be able to see. And we also have a mission to do economic development. And that's the piece that a lot of people don't know, that we are charged with trying to come up with ways to improve our neighborhood. First to create the neighborhood and then continue to improve it. We, over the years, have had opportunities to acquire real estate, and it wasn't by design. This wasn't the plan. The plan in the 70s, when the theaters were being restored and being brought back to their grandeur, it was always anticipated that the development community, the investment community, would swoop in and leverage off of the great work that was done restoring the theaters. And to the surprise of our board and our leadership, that didn't happen. And people didn't come in to make the investment. In fact, for a period of years, we had a pretty dysfunctional ownership set up in Playhouse Square of different building owners. And as the buildings became available, we had a very opportunistic viewing board who said, let's seize the moment and control our destiny. Let's at least get them into good hands where we can be good stewards of these buildings, and we'll see what happens down the road. And down the road is kind of here, and we now own over 1 million square feet of office space in Playhouse Square, and we own the Wyndham Hotel, and we own a garage and some parking lots, and we continue to look to ways to improve, beyond what it looks like today. And in fact, it wasn't long ago that Tom Einhaus spearheaded the rebranding of the neighborhood with the now famous world's largest outdoor GE chandelier, which has brought, every time they do the telecast of the sporting events, that's our chandelier there. So real estate services actually was created out of necessity. Once you acquire 1 million square feet of space, you got to manage it. And we started a real estate company a little over 10 years ago that not only does that management, but also we now take our talent around Northeast Ohio and actually manage another 1.5 million square feet for third parties. We do the Nordson corporate headquarters. We do all the work for automated packaging in Streetsboro, and in fact do all their transaction work around the country. We manage the Museum of Contemporary Art in University Circle. All this real estate work translates back into roughly 39% of the revenue for Playhouse Square. It's a very unusual business model that allows a for-profit entity, namely real estate services, to idle underneath the hood of the not-for-profit and actually help sustain the arts. So that's, like I said, it's an unusual business model. The Wall Street Journal did an article on us several years ago, trying to find another model like this. And, just because we ended up with it the way that we did, you can't find one. But it's been terrific, and I think we're really known for partnerships, for collaboration. We put together the Idea Center deal to benefit WCPN, WVIZ. Playhouse Square owns it with them. We also bought the Middow building for the benefit of Cleveland State. Cleveland State ultimately will own that building. And we're looking at some other partnerships that you couldn't do unless you had the long-term perspective of a Playhouse Square. Our role is to be facilitators. We're here to offer a certain amount of creativity and leadership, not just for what goes on inside the arches, but also what happens in downtown Cleveland, which is why when Dave and I began to build the table for how to address the 912 district, or what became 912, one of the first people we went to was Art Falco at Playhouse Square. And we just continued to build the table. We very much are collaboration-minded. We are, in fact, looking at a pretty fascinating opportunity, I think, for changing the northern edge of our neighborhood where Greyhound is. And we've been looking at that with Greyhound for about 5 years on how to effectively relocate them to a location that's better for their operation. And again, as Joe talked about, you look at parking lots as opportunities to develop. There's a pretty significant one right next to Greyhound. So that's really what Playhouse Square Real Estate Services is all about. And thanks for having me on the panel.
Great, thanks. Okay, now we need to get Stephanie's slides up here.
I was hoping you're going to be the technical assistant there, or I'll stand up or get a 10-year-old, right? Any 10-year-old can do it. Nobody here. While he's doing that, I really want to welcome you all to the campus of Cleveland State University. Some of you may have been here or passed by in the last 10, 20, 30 years ago, and do you think it looks the same or different? Different for the better? I remember the first, I moved here actually in 1994, and I used to drive from Glenville to downtown along Euclid, and I didn't know what all those ugly buildings were. There was no sign. You didn't even know it was a college. In fact, I thought Rhodes Tower was a prison because it looked so much like the other prison, right?
I don't know which slideshow it is.
Over near the Justice Center. So I'm happy to say that it really started with President Swartz, who decided that CSU needed to turn outward to the community rather than hunkering down with our back turned and can't find the doors and just walk along the tubes above the ground, never to set foot on the city sidewalks. So I'm very happy to have been around for part of that. I actually started with CSU as a trustee, so I saw some of that start in 2007, and have been on board as an administrator since 11. Getting close? See it?
Nope.
It's in something called panelist folder.
Ah, there's the panelist folder. Thank you. And there you are.
So what I'd like to do is just quickly share with you, Dr. White did a great job of talking about our strategic priorities overall as a university, and then hone in on some key master plan projects that are yet to come, things that you can be looking out for on our campus in the next little period here.
What kind of presentation is it?
It's a PowerPoint. So let me see. Where's the young lady? There here she comes. She's coming to rescue us.
Thank you.
So let me just talk through the words, and then when it pulls up, I'll just go to the picture. So there's really 4 strategic priorities that our senior team landed on at a retreat just this last August, and all of them have a part in driving what we're doing in terms of real estate. One is to continue to strengthen our academic offerings. We want to continue to be a school that people now choose to come to as opposed to just a school of last resort. That also includes growing full-time faculty, and that all has space implications. Secondly, we want to drive recruitment across all student segments. So right now, about 85–90% of our students come from the region. We want to expand that and start to talk about international students, folks from outside the region, et cetera. So that has an impact. I'm actually on that second slide. Maybe there you go. One more. Great. We want to grow our graduate school enrollment. So you can imagine what impact that would have on real estate. So now we're talking about getting even more older students here that will help enhance our reputation in some areas where we've had a great reputation. And finally, we want to continue our undergraduate student success. And there's literature that says that if you're on campus, your chances of success are better than if you're not. So with all those implications, I wanted to just flip through about 4 buildings that speak to each of those, or 4 projects. One is an academic building, which is the Washington College of Engineering. Second is a student-focused space that we're calling the Great Lawn. Talk about the additional student housing that we want to do in the near term, and then what that implies in terms of our athletics and our complex on Chester. So that is the coming Washington College of Engineering. It's a great project. It's about 100,000 square feet. It's built off the end of the current Finn Hall. It was a combination of capital budget money and some private gifts from Parker Hanneman and Washkowitz. And it's really going to change the face of Chester. That's basically right across the street from what's currently the Langston. So look for that. The old Chester building is down. How many people ever had classes in the old Chester building? I saved you a brick. Just come by my office. But we were kind of glad to see that one go and see this nice, shiny, bright, state-of-the-art engineering building, because this will allow our students to study engineering in a very similar setting that they would expect to see in the workplace, which is our goal. This is an example, whoops, I'm back up one more. This is an example of the maker space that's going to be in. So you walk in on the first floor, you're going to be able to look down and see this great room with equipment and benches that students and others around campus will be practicing their skills and actually making things. So that is scheduled to be done in December 2017. The next project here is what we're calling the Great Lawn, and that's actually along Euclid. If you picture where the music building is now, and you go over to where the law building is now, right now you have something that looks like a crop circle, which is from a building that used to be there, and then you've got this sort of hodgepodge of different landscape. Well, we want to make that look like a lawn, like a real square, if you will, on a college campus. And we want that displayed along Euclid, so you really do know that you're driving through a campus. And so that our students can do whatever they do now, which we used to play Frisbee football, but I'm sure it's something else and has to do with the phone, but at least they can do it in the green, right? And that's an example of how we might have some public art there. You can see sort of the openness along Euclid so that people can look in and see that they are in fact passing through a college campus. And then the final project, so to speak, is the intent to put another 750 or 1,000 beds of housing potentially right next to the Langston and the tennis courts. The court now has a dome over it. I hope you've noticed. You should come check it out if you're a tennis player. It's the only covered tennis in downtown Cleveland, and we do serve the public, so check that out. But what we really want to do there is expand on the energy that has started with the Langston, which was a private investment on our land. This too could end up being a P3 type opportunity. But that means that we got to move the athletic field. So the soccer field and the base softball field, we're envisioning going to the north and to the east along Payne over to about 24th or 25th Street, so that becomes a nice complex there. And the athletic director has big dreams, and he wants me to build in that building as well on that site, which would serve as sort of a field house and serve the guests that would be coming to those athletic events. So that's what we have in mind. What are the challenges? You know, the price tag is always a challenge, about $500 million, and you didn't even see it all. So we've got to assemble that from multiple sources. And then the second opportunity is, as Richie was saying, from the student perspective, there is a strong demand for additional housing. So we want to build off that. Thank you.
Excellent. Now we have some time for some questions. Richie, I wanted to start with you. I thought it was an interesting news in the Plain Dealer today, as well as some Cranes information I read. And, you know, obviously Forbes, you know, Cleveland ranks 4th in terms of value as defined by median salary versus median home value. So great news there. And then there's this other survey. On the front page of the paper, they were talking about Allstate Insurance and FTI Consulting. Morale is up in Cleveland, which was profiled. The question that I want you to answer, and probably some of the other panelists might want to jump in here, is that the other issues that study raised is that 2/3 of the people surveyed believe that the economic recovery here is uneven. And many people think that our local institutions are unimaginative and have stale or unremarkable ideas for approaching this region's challenges. What do you think?
So it's uneven because where we're at. So Cleveland's like a snake shedding its skin, right? You have older jobs being shed. You have a target workforce still skilled up for those jobs. And then you have disinvestment, physical, associated with that. And then you have an advanced economy. And you have folks prepared, and then you have a housing product for those folks. And so it's a bi-directional right now. We're not Boston, where everything is just hot. We're not Pittsburgh, where things are tipping. It's this really tale of two cities at this moment. And there's no doubt about it. It doesn't mean we should stop reinvesting in the urban core. The idea of gentrification, this is way, way down the line. But the difficulty is, as far as imagination, you know, Cleveland, there was a great paper where it was referenced, Cleveland was a historical accident. We became Silicon Valley because we were on a river and on a lake. And there was iron ore up north, and there was coal down southwest, and we became Cleveland. It's a lot harder to remake yourself, right? It's a lot harder to find your reason to be. What I think it's gonna be, it's around healthcare. Not just simply services, but this idea of white coat, right? Can we build, for instance, a legal knowledge base on merger and acquisitions? Because that's going all over, you know, with healthcare, it's become the the healthcare Hunger Games, right? The big are going to get bigger, and the small hospitals are going to get smaller, and that's going to benefit Cleveland because we have great healthcare knowledge. So how do we expand this healthcare knowledge into other industries to continue this economic restructuring? It takes a lot of effort. Healthcare analytics is going to be a huge field. IBM coming to Cleveland could be a game changer, but Nashville is in the game of healthcare IT. So how do we strategize around these emerging economies? But again, remaking yourself is a lot harder than stumbling upon something. It's very difficult.
I will, add to that too about it being so uneven in Cleveland and our sort of the relic of some of our institutions. I really believe one of Cleveland's problems, and this is very difficult to challenge or to get your hands around, has to do with how parochial we are. We have 59 cities in Cuyahoga County, 59 mayors, police chiefs, fire chiefs, and people now are looking at East Cleveland and this annexation discussion. And a big reason that's being looked at is it's a city that's in trouble, but more importantly, it's a community that's, for a whole bunch of reasons, has been underserved and neglected. And the issue of race doesn't get discussed much with that. I think that the state of Ohio, if it weren't for some of the politics, East Cleveland would have been in a receivership or bankruptcy forced upon them by the state. But I think the politics of that would be too dicey, and it's been a problem in Michigan. But I mention that only because if you do this the right way, if that annexation occurs the right way, and that means holistically with a lot of people at the table, with the county, the state, the metro parks, RTA, continuing the health line, University Circle getting involved, you will see a successful outcome. And I mention that only because I believe that will happen, hopefully in our lifetime, by the way. But you will see many suburbs in Cuyahoga County having those discussions because there are a lot that are in trouble. And when you think of the disinvestment, I think of where I live in Ohio City, but I'll tell you right now, my sister's having a heck of a time trying to sell her house in Euclid. And talk to people in Garfield Heights. Talk to people in Parma. You look at their tax rates, their built-out communities. Where do you turn for resources to run your town? So I think when I hear those comments, these are discussions that aren't really being handled by many people that can make a difference, and they're tough to take on. They're very, very tough to take on. So I think those are things we've really got to look at as a region if we're going to restore our economic strength.
Great point, Tony. And kind of along those lines related to, these 59 communities and shared services, let me flip this back to Alan and Stephanie. I mean, your two institutions have collaborated and actually cohabitate in a certain space. Could you guys talk about that and what drove it and what's the benefit?
I'll start.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the art community was being envisioned back when I was a trustee in 2007. I think it was the original brainchild of President Swartz, if I'm remembering correctly. And the idea was that we sort of had this broken down industrial building with our theater and our arts all sort of tucked in there that everybody was afraid to go to. And we had these buildings at Playhouse Square that needed some love and attention and another reason to be. So we thought that it was a great opportunity, and we had another opportunity for that space. That land we needed to build the Langston on. So there was a reason to move that facility, and there was a further reason to put it closer to where, again, our students could live out our tagline, which is engaged learning. We wanted our students to be able to actually learn theater in a theater, and so it just made sense to start talking, and we were able to come to a deal that made sense for everyone. Maybe, Alan, you can talk a little bit about the structure in terms of how we got it built and how it's structured.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that this has worked so well, Dave, is that, as I mentioned before, we are collaborators. I mean, we're collaborators by nature just because we share the stages across so many different uses and so many people within our organization own different pieces that we have been trained to collaborate. But we also look for opportunities to do things creatively, and when we see a need, we're kind of deal junkies, you know? And so if we see that need and we can marry it up with a piece of real estate that is underperforming or underutilized, and also offer something to Cleveland State at the Middow Building, which was a skill set in working with historic tax credits, and we have the people in place to bring something to the table that you don't have and you're bringing your use to us. That's what has to happen. You know, to Tony's point, that's got to happen across a lot of areas to make things work, because the resources, being redundant and holding the resources close to your chest will not improve our region and won't allow us to go forward. And there's no reason that we shouldn't be thinking of reaching out to others that have the skill sets in this room, you know, to try and affect projects and make those things happen.
Since I'm between the two of you, I'm going to seize this opportunity and say that what they're talking about is absolutely critical. And some cities or regions have really been a little bit ahead of Cleveland on that. Columbus is a good example. Columbus had an entity called Campus Partners, which was a partnership with the city of Columbus and Ohio State University. They even conveyed through the city the power of eminent domain. So a lot of the improvements near Ohio State University over the last 20 years was through that Campus Partners project. And Yale did the same thing in New Haven, where they worked with other nonprofits that had development interests, education interests. When you think about the student population, and I, 2 degrees from Cleveland State, I mean, we had a choice of living at, when I was in law school, I had friends that lived at, what was the hotel? Swingo's Keg and Quarter. They had a whole floor. That's where they lived. Law students at Swingo's Keg and Quarter. But, now you've got terrific housing options, and they're staying downtown, they're spending money downtown, they're going to restaurants, they're going to Playhouse Square. These are amenities that really create a vibrant local economy. So what they're doing together is critical.
Well, and I would add one more point, which is the fact that we have the Downtown Cleveland Alliance and the Ambassador Program, the Clean and Safe Program, that grew out of Playhouse Square. It was Playhouse Square who said, let's create a bid. Let's do a business improvement district for the benefit of all the building owners in that area, and let's share services. Mm-hmm. Let's do it in such a way that we're economically approaching keeping the place clean and keeping it safe. And it was so successful that it then went citywide. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to go beyond the boundaries where it is right now.
Well, I certainly want to offer the opportunity for the audience to ask questions.
I think I could answer some of that. To be very candid, there's a lot going on to address that. You now have 3 pedestrian tunnels and then now a new vehicular connection to the Shoreway and more importantly to Edgewater Park. You have the Lakeland Trail now coming up to connect to the Towpath Trail and to Whiskey Island directly through Tremont and Ohio City. That's, I think, a significant opportunity. And you've got very strong CDCs that are driving some of the development. I mean, some of the CDCs are doing things that are really outside the box. I mean, they're co-developers. They're allowing, facilitating some developers getting real estate for infill housing, particularly in Ohio City. So I think all of that is going on at the same time, and I think that's going to continue to drive the development. And you are in such close proximity to downtown. I mean, I go to Indians games on my bike, and that's kind of a thing that you don't have a whole lot of places like that.
How much time do we have? Perfect. Okay. So, Alan, this is an important question. You keep talking about that GE chandelier. How many crystals are in that thing?
Well, Dave, thank you for asking.
I hope you guys talked before that.
Yeah, well, I have not counted them personally. I have been told there are 4,200 crystals, all hand-finished and hand-placed on the chandelier. Tom, is that the correct number? Thank you.
Well, you've certainly created a sense of place there, and I think that's a lot of what we're talking about here. Tony, I'd ask the question of you. Obviously, Public Square, tremendous success, and what do you think the impact is? I mean, you've already talked about an economic impact, and also, what are we going to have to focus on to make certain that it remains a world-class space?
Well, the main thing, and we have a loaned executive from the Metro Parks, but the main thing we're doing now with that issue is to program it. I mean, you want to make sure that the space is properly maintained, programmed, that there are things going on. And what's really exciting about it is you've seen people from all over the county that come down to Public Square. I mean, they're all different races, incomes, people that haven't been downtown in years. And it's nice to see it kind of as a coming together place for our community. So I think that the programming part is going to be very important. We're going to still have to work through the transportation issue. That's sort of being looked at right now because, frankly, over with the RNC, it was so successful as a destination that there was a desire to maybe try to look at the bus situation again. And I think that'll work its way out. I think we expected to have the Superior reopen, but that it could be closed for special events. So that's being looked at right now. But we're happy with how it turned out, and I think it's an example of if you do something in collaboration. We couldn't have done it without a whole bunch of partners from the state, the city, the county, all the foundations in town were at the table. That was really important. So I think that it's a good example of if you really put together the right people at the table from all over the community, you can really make a difference. And I think the project's been successful because of all the people that have been part of it.
On time and under budget.
On time and not exactly under budget.
1 out of 2 ain't bad.
And I will say it wasn't. I will say it was not the RNC. One of the questions I get from some people in the media, and I'm sure there are 1 or 2 here, was was this RNC driven? And it wasn't. It was started in 2010. That was when the project started. What the RNC did, though, it was sort of the catalyst. We had to get it done because we were halfway there. So that was the important thing about the RNC. We got a lot of things done from a capital standpoint in our city because of that convention. So that was a good thing.
Well, a question I have is, what do you guys see as the next big thing in the next 3 to 5 years here? Stephanie, you obviously outlined a very significant opportunity for the university. What else are we seeing on the horizon?
Well, one of the things I hope to see and that we've started seeing is to have private money come in and invest around us. I think CSU has created an anchor, which is what you want to do in a neighborhood, and so now other people's balance sheets can continue the growth. We've got a great example of that with the firm Asset Plus that bought the old Y. And then we've got Clayco putting up the big development right there, I think at 18th or so in Euclid. So I want to see more dollars coming in to take advantage of what we've started.
Dave, I tend to look at things from about 5,000 feet up, and I think if you look at downtown Cleveland, the CBD, it will become very clear to you the gaps that we have now. And I think over the next few years, you're going to find those gaps closing with exactly what Stephanie's talking about.
And I think, the next big thing is for sale housing along the health tech corridor where there's the land, right? We're talking Huff, Fairfax. We'll see how quick it can be done, but I think there's forces there that it could happen.
And I would make the comment, I think, in the remarks about what's going on here at Cleveland State, the fact that we've got a grade school and a high school is very important. And we need to address that because given the demographic shifts that we've had, we need to make certain we've got quality schools in and around downtown so we can keep these people in the next few years.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the education component of our city is absolutely critical. We have to stick with, I think, this transformation plan as best we can. My daughter happens to go to Campus International School, and I can tell you it's as good of a grade school as there is in the region. The demand to get in there is high. The kids are from all over the place. And the Cleveland Public School System can do it. If you look at what's going on at John Hay, the School of the Arts, these are stellar institutions of learning. And when I think of some of the things Richie points out about education and the prosperity in some of the cities in the United States that are doing much better than Cleveland, a lot of it comes down to educational attainment and where they're at and the kinds of jobs they're getting. You know, when we had 280,000 manufacturing jobs in the city of Cleveland, now we're down to like 122. You know, just a good high school diploma and you were all set. But those are gone, so we really have to figure that out, and that's going to be our future. We really
Yep.
got to stick with that.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time here, so unfortunately, apologize. But want to thank the panel. Appreciate your time and effort in this, and thank you for listening.
Nice job. Really, what year? Oh, okay. Fifth grade. Great. You're welcome.
Yeah, she's here. We got to get power to this computer. It's going to die.
It's like one of those best secrets. Well, if you're already in the business.
You're fine.
I'm not reading the paper, these are props. No, just go on show, yep. And then where's the clicker? Oh, the guy's got the clicker there. Excellent. I'm ready. I'm ready when you are.
All right. So before I introduce the speaker, if we can have one more round of applause for David and all of the panelists. I think that was a very great discussion for them, and we thank you. So before I invite our last speaker, Spencer Levy, to the stage, I wanted to remind the audience that there is a networking reception in the lobby outside the ballroom following Mr. Levy's presentation. Please also do not forget to sign our sheet at registration for continuing education credit. And if you look on your table, the little white box, those are thumb drives for all the individuals in attendance, so please make sure to pick one of those up. I would now like to welcome our last speaker of today, Spencer Levy, Head of Global Research of CBRE. So please, everybody, give a round of applause for Mr. Spencer Levy.
The last time I was in Cleveland was about 8 weeks ago, and there was a big parade in the middle of town, and I was thinking that it was for me. It was the day after the Cavaliers had won the title, so I realized it wasn't for me. I was doing in Cleveland that day was I was meeting with the Fed. The Fed had invited me in, along with several of my senior economists, to debate where we are in the economy. Made one of us do the bull case, one of us to do the bear case, and there's certainly good evidence to go both ways today. What I'm going to do for the next hour or so is I'm going to debate with you where we are globally, in the United States, and then locally in the economy, and then bringing it down to commercial real estate. I warn you in advance, I try to make this interactive. I will be coming out to the audience to ask you questions as much as I will ask you to ask me questions at the end of this presentation. So to begin, don't take my word for it that the world is debating where we are in the market. This is what the media is saying, where we are.
Spencer, great to have you with us.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here. Chinese investment in the United States has been growing rapidly for the last 4 years.
Spencer, do you feel like they're overpaying? Does
No,
this
I don't.
smack you at all of sort of Japan, 1980s?
That was about $6 billion. Then you had the sausage deal.
Is that Abe Frobin, the sausage king of Chicago?
And then now this.
Listen, I'm sorry if I'm a little bit skeptical. I'm getting old and crotchety. There's a little bit of, it smacks of
It reeks of peak.
desperation.
It reeks of peak.
And I
Yeah,
certainly
I like that.
understand.
I'm gonna,
Peak,
I
yeah.
trademark, hereby trademark.
Sure.
We're going to take that money and run.
Well, look,
All right, Spencer, thank you.
thank you very much.
Rod, who is about to join us? Bob, I believe it's going to be Spencer Levy. Come on down. You're the next contestant on The Price is Right.
Yes, that was really me in both video clips. I wish that Price is Right tape was yesterday. I wish I won, but here I am today. So, to begin, let's get to the big picture. The Brexit occurred a couple of months ago, and people thought it was all about the UK leaving the EU. That's what happened, but that's not why it happened, and that's not the big issue. The big issue that's in the world today is the difference between those people who have benefited from globalization and automation and those who have not. By the way, there's a little buzzing in the room. Somebody can fix that? The issue that we're seeing with the Brexit is manifesting itself here in the United States presidential election. It's manifesting itself in other elections around the world. And this issue is not going to go away no matter who wins the U.S. presidential election. Now, back to what happened with the Brexit. What happened with the Brexit, in addition to the big picture causes of it, it caused the stock market to fall back, it caused the bond market to have yields fall, and it caused the value of the British dollar to depress. Now, the good news is that it only lasted for a limited period of time. So the market bounced back. And the market bounced back very quickly, unlike what happened back in January of this year when we had the Chinese stock market pull back, and what happened back in June of last year, we had the other Chinese stock market correction. What it means is that the world was resilient to its most recent sentiment shock. Now, we still have some things in the world that are going on that are negative. Bond yields are still ridiculously low. I say ridiculously low because bond yields aren't just a cost of capital. Bond yields are a reflection of global expectations for growth and global feelings about risk. Bond yields this low and negative yields overseas mean the world is scared and the world does not believe there's going to be any additional growth. But the bottom line is this: the world has been more resilient this time than it was for prior shocks, which is a very good thing. The brick wall. A lot of you guys think this is going to be a Donald Trump comment, but the brick wall is about the BRIC countries, B-R-I-C. Brazil, Russia, India, China. They are known as the BRICS. Sometimes people put South Africa in there, make it BRICS, B-R-I-C-S. These countries were supposed to be the drivers of global growth for the last 5 years and going forward. The reality is they've disappointed us. Brazil has been a major problem. Brazil's GDP has compressed over the last couple of years, not only because of political corruption schemes, but they have what is known in world economic circles as the curse of oil. What does that mean? tendency of your country is to do nothing but that. And you don't translate your country into complex goods, which is where you have to go in order to be competitive long term. Brazil never shifted. Brazil has suffered when the price of oil went down. Russia, similarly, when the price of oil collapsed, has also suffered, in addition to their geopolitical stance, which has caused there to be sanctions placed upon them, and their economy suffered. India. The interesting thing about comparing and contrasting India and China is it puts a lot of conventional notions on its head. Specifically, India is a democracy, but they are also based upon some indices of ease of doing business and world corruption indexes, one of the most difficult places in the world to do business. They also have poor infrastructure. And part of that is due to the fact that they may have too much democracy. Contrast that with China, not a democracy, centralized planning, put in a ton of infrastructure, and there have been a corruption crackdown. However heavy-handed it's been, it will help China over the long term. But China has its problems today because what they're trying to do is shift from an economy that's based upon manufacturing investment to services and consumption. Very hard to do, but every major country in the world, including the United States, has made that shift. So we'll see if China gets there, but right now it's on a very debt fuel binge to get there, and we certainly hope they'll get there quickly. Capital flows. All this globalization matters because it affects the flow of capital to the United States. This is the flow of capital to the United States from foreign countries in the last year or so. You'll see that China has the biggest piece of the pie, followed by Canada. Every year I've done this chart for the last 10 years, Canada has always taken the top spot. But this year, for the first time, China has overtaken it. But you'll also notice some other slices of this pie, notably Germany and some of the Middle Eastern countries, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. The Germany slice, the light blue piece, is very important. Why are we seeing more German investment in the United States today? Negative interest rates in Germany. Investors don't want to put the money under their mattress. They want to put it into a yielding asset here in the United States. And that's why you're seeing yields continue to compress here because they still look attractive compared to their alternatives. If you take a look at the Middle Eastern slices, they're still on the chart. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, low price of oil, Middle Easterns are going to stop buying in the U.S. Hasn't happened. A couple of reasons for that. Much like the United States investment community is not a unified entity, neither are Middle Eastern entities. So I was in Bahrain last year. I'm going to Abu Dhabi in a couple of weeks. And when I was there, I met with high net worth individuals. And there were many billionaires in that room, including the Crown Prince showed up at one of my meetings. At the end of the day, these people want to get as much of their money into safe havens like the United States, and dare I say it, London, as quickly as possible, notwithstanding the Brexit, notwithstanding the fact that about a third of all property contracts were canceled when the Brexit occurred. There's people lining up to get in there right now, because London is on sale, it has its own currency, and people figured out that the Brexit won't be quite as bad as they had originally anticipated. What cities are people investing in the United States? We did a poll recently of the top cities in the United States that people want to invest in. And you'll see that the large, diversified markets do quite well. Los Angeles coming out #1. But you also see the tech markets on there. San Francisco, Austin, Texas, Boston. The thing you should notice is that if you look to the right, it shows you what the rankings were last year. And the rankings of all the big tech companies fell. San Francisco went from 1st to 4th. Seattle went from 5th to 7th. Austin, Texas went from 6th to 12th. Why? People are afraid the tech market might be getting a little toppy. And because of that, the large, diversified markets will prevail over the long term. Los Angeles comes out #1 in just about every ranking we do, not just survey rankings, but actual performance in the marketplace, because Los Angeles has been a laggard behind some of its brethren like San Jose and San Francisco, but also Los Angeles is expected to have the greatest amount of net job growth in the next 2 years, of high-paying jobs in the media industry. So Los Angeles shows very well. New York always gets good ratings, and New York sometimes doesn't show up well on job growth statistics. But New York, from an absolute job growth basis, is still the powerhouse in the United States. How much of a powerhouse? New York, in the last 10 years, educated people to the New York MSA, 40 million people in the MSA. How big is 1 million people? That's the entire city of Dallas. So some of these big cities are doing well, tech cities not doing quite as well. Let's talk about Cleveland. Cleveland has shown good growth over the last couple of years, as you can see on the chart. That growth over the last 5 years was about 6.5%, which is just a shade behind Chicago. And its growth over the next 5 years is just a shade behind Chicago. So Cleveland's growth, while good, is not quite as high as some other cities. Now, it starts to be hard to read. By the way, I'll give everybody these slides. The good news, remember what I said earlier about large, diversified cities doing well over the long term. While Cleveland didn't show up on the last chart, Cleveland is a large, diversified economy which will serve it well when we have the next recession. Now, the next recession is going to happen. I'm not going to come up here and say we're not going to have one. And just so you know, I'm not hiding the ball. Our house view is that it's going to happen sometime in mid-2018, so about 2 years out. Just so you know. But Cleveland is a large, diversified economy. Well, what's attractive about Cleveland, among other things, is some of the industries where it has a concentration. Most notably in education and in healthcare. Let me cut to the chase, folks. So take a look at Cleveland's percentage of its economy on education and healthcare, about 19%, about 4% higher than the national average. This will serve Cleveland very well over the next several years. And if you take a look at the leasing volume in the United States over the last couple of years, healthcare came out second behind high tech. Now, Cleveland does not have the high tech sector like some other cities, but it does have education and healthcare. Education is an enormous benefit. Sitting here at Cleveland State, Case Western Reserve, and some of the other schools. That is the key driver for everything. Focus on the education system here, much like the comments made before, not only from the college level, but from the primary level, and you'll be well served over the long term. The U.S. presidential election. You know, I've been lecturing like this for about 8 years, and I have avoided politics like the plague. You can't win on these comments, but it seems as though this year I can't avoid it. So I'm going to run right to it and tell you my thoughts on how the U.S. presidential election is going to impact commercial real estate. But first, before I begin, I have to give everybody a caveat. Every which of this piece of this is true. Donald Trump was my first client when I was a lawyer at Jones Day in New York. My cousin worked for Hillary's 2008 campaign and ended up working for President Obama and Larry Summers for 6 years. Ted Cruz is my classmate at Harvard Law School. And Bernie Sanders looks and sounds exactly like my grandfather. So I've got a lot of ducks in the pond, lots of places I can go here, no real favorite from my personal perspective. But let me address the race in two ways. First, I'm going to go Democrat versus Republican, and then I'm going to go Hillary versus Donald. First, we thought that a good way to judge how good a president is for the economy, just when I'm talking about economic issues, I'm keeping all social and other controversial issues aside. From an economic perspective, I think it's fair to say that some people believe that Republicans might be better for the economy than Democrats. I don't think it's sort of say that, but that's, some people say that. But then we took a look. We studied presidential administrations going back to the Truman administration to try to determine, well, were Democrats or Republicans better for the economy? And the results were quite mixed. You couldn't really see a trend whether a Democrat or a Republican was better for the economy. As a matter of fact, does anybody want to guess which president had the best GDP growth during their administration? Shout it out. Clinton. Anybody else? Eisenhower. Anybody else? When I do that question, I always get a Clinton guy and a Reagan guy. I didn't get that today. That way we can split up the room and figure out where people really stand. But it was Kennedy Johnson, 5.01% GDP growth during their administration, followed by Clinton at 365, followed by Ronald Reagan at 364. What we also determined was we really didn't have a very good metric for determining how good a president was, because a president is subject to the policies, good and bad, of its predecessors. So you may love or you may not love President Obama. Can't blame him for 2009. Same thing with Ronald Reagan. Can't blame him for 1981, where there was a terrible recession. But the president who got dinged the hardest was Harry Truman. In 1946, we had negative 11.2% GDP growth. And people say, whoa, that must have been a bad president, right? Well, all he did was end World War II and stop building tanks and planes and guns, so we didn't spend as much money. So the bottom line is, pretty hard to say Democrat versus Republican is better for the economy. Let's get right down to Donald versus Secretary Clinton. First, let me just give you the odds, okay? We check the betting odds all day on interest rate rises. We check it on outcomes of political elections. Right now, Hillary Clinton has about an 80% chance of winning. But the most important odds you need to see are not just the chances of her winning, the chances of changing control of the different pieces of our legislature. So there's a 50-50 chance that the Senate flips as well from Republican to Democrat, but there is only a 10% chance that the House of Representatives flips. So the most likely scenario here is that we're going to see divided government, which from a business economic point of view is probably the best outcome. It's probably a better outcome to have divided government than to have it be pure Democrat or to have it be pure Republican. So that's the most likely outcome. Let's run right to the most controversial issue. As I mentioned, I'm heading to Abu Dhabi in a couple of weeks, and I had a pre-meeting prep with my client in New York a couple weeks ago. And straight up, foreign investors are afraid of Donald Trump wins. That is a fact. It's a fact for my Middle Eastern investors. It's a fact for my Latin American investors. I'm going down to Brazil in Chile in 2 weeks. It's also an emerging fact for many of my domestic investors. So there is that fear factor, the unknown factor, besides some of the most controversial statements he said. I think his biggest problem is that it's just a blank statement. We really don't know what he's going to do. So that is certainly scaring the world. That is a big negative. So the way I see this election is like this. If Donald wins, if Mr. Trump wins, I see it as similar to what we saw with the Brexit. In the following way. Number one, not only are the underlying causes of it the same, because Donald is explicitly courting the same types of voters that were courted in the Brexit, but I think the world reaction will be similar, where we saw a short-term pullback from Brexit, and then the world began to bounce back very quickly. Now, the reason why I say short-term and not long-term, because I think once you go long-term, you then have to take out a piece of paper and compare Secretary Clinton to Mr. Trump from an economic point of view. And there are many things that are strongly in favor of Secretary Clinton, including her stance on globalization, the U.S. reputation, her stance on trade, notwithstanding what she said about the TPP. I am almost 100% confident that some form of that is going to get passed if she becomes the president. And global trade is a good thing, notwithstanding the fact that it has certain negative ramifications over the short term for some people, and unfortunately some of that happens in places like Ohio. But over the long term, there are other policies that you need to take into consideration, including tax policy, where it's likely that Mr. Trump will be more favorable to business, and regulation, which is another area where it's likely to be more favorable to business. On balance, you can take these different factors in the long term, and you can make a toss-up case for one versus the other. It's a long way of saying this. Once you step back from the political issues of the day, whether Mr. Trump or Secretary Clinton wins, the United States will be okay over the long term. It doesn't really matter who wins the U.S. presidential election, because the world is changing far faster than our politics. In 2002, 2% of the population in Africa had a cell phone. Anybody want to guess what that population, that percentage of people in Africa that have a cell phone today? 80%, very close, good guess. 80% of people in Africa have a cell phone. That's an unbelievable number, because they can communicate, they can do commerce together. They could. Do they really need a state government? Technology is changing who holds the power in the world and what power really means. So you take a look at what happened at the terrible terrorist incident we had in San Bernardino 6 months ago, where after the incident, the United States companies wouldn't let them do it. And the tech companies won. Unbelievable how much power these groups were wielding. But it's also changing what parts of the world are most powerful. It's changing the notion of the city versus the state versus the country. New York City has more GDP growth, more GDP than all of sub-Saharan Africa combined. One city. You see more and more of that concentration of wealth in these cities because the physical location of people is less important now than ever before. And that's why you're seeing people concentrate in clusters, coming back to these clusters around not only talent, but infrastructure and access to good education. Infrastructure and education, folks, two words are the most important ones in this conversation. But there's a big debate going on right now in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. The debate is between the so-called techno-optimists and the so-called techno-pessimists. Techno-optimists are people like Bill Gates and the author of this book here that I just read, Industries of the Future by Alec Ross, very good read. This gentleman was the Chief Innovation Officer for Secretary Clinton when she was the Secretary of State. They're telling us that we're all going to be better off long term. Artificial intelligence is going to give us self-driving cars. We're going to be more productive. We're going to be happier. But there's a growing group of techno-pessimists out there. And they have some very good arguments on their side. I say, well, that's all great. Maybe we will be better off then. But between now and then, what's going to happen to the industries that are lost? What's going to happen to the people that lose their jobs? And is tech actually making us better off? And what they're going to point to are some statistics that show that the productivity of the average worker in the United States is slowing down. The rate of growth has been slowing since 1970 and actually went negative in the first quarter of this year. Notwithstanding the fact that everybody in this room's got a cell phone, iPad, iWatch, technology has peaked. Maybe. They'll say, well, the cell phone's really great. The cell phone isn't the invention of electricity. It's not the immunization programs that came into place in the late 19th century, where the average age, the average living standard, the average person went from 50 years old to 75 years old. So maybe tech isn't as good as it could be. But I will tell you there are other reasons why we are slowing down. And slowing down not only in terms of GDP growth, but slowing down in terms of productivity. And it's not tech's fault. The bigger issues are things like demographics. Demographics is the single biggest issue facing the Western and many parts of the other world today. People are getting older, and there aren't enough young folks to replace them. If you take a look at the chart, you will see that the average age of a person living in the United States today is 38 years old, up from 28 years old in 1970, and they're living to 80 years old. When you take a look at Germany and Japan, that's where the problems really become pronounced. People talk about Germany bringing in all of these refugees, and they're doing it for moral reasons and for historic reasons, and they absolutely are. But they're also doing it for demographic reasons. They have to bring in younger population because their birth rate is well below the replacement rate. So you know the replacement rate is 2.1 people per woman in your country. They're not doing it fast enough. Japan has a terrible problem. Japan's problem is not only they're not having kids at a fast enough rate, they don't allow immigration. And that's why when you talk about these immigration issues here in the United States, you have to look at it from the long-term success of the United States. Why are so many tech companies outsourcing their work to places like Vancouver? Because Canada has a more liberal policy than we do on immigration. But there are other reasons why we're slowing down, not just demographics. The other reasons have to do with political intransience. You can't get stuff done in Washington, so we can't spend money. It has to do with the enormous debt load that we have. And it has to do with income inequality. Income inequality, putting aside the moral issue behind income inequality, leads to the political intransience that we have here today. We can't cut a deal in our government. And so because of that, and other reasons, spending is slowing down. Anybody know who that is? Who here had an Evel Knievel toy as a kid? limitations. You make Anybody know what motorcycle Mr. Knievel's riding there? That's his famous Sky Cycle. What did he attempt to do with the Sky Cycle? Come on, guys. Somebody knows what he did. Snake River Canyon, and did he make it? No. For all those people who are going to YouTube it, Mr. Knievel didn't make it. Why do I have a picture of Mr. Knievel in my news? Because there are two theories on the cycle. By the way, when I speak to investors, their biggest fear isn't the U.S. presidential election. It isn't China. It isn't oil. It isn't geopolitical. It is, are we at the end of the cycle? And I use the example of Mr. Knievel because there are two theories on the cycle. One theory on the cycle is that there is one cycle that affects everybody, every market, about the same. The second theory on the cycle is that there are multiple cycles, depending upon your city, depending upon your asset type, and your industry concentration. Mr. Knievel is a good example of that. This was the only time he used the Sky Cycle. He used other cycles for different occasions. When he tried to jump the fountains at Caesar's Palace, he was using a Triumph motorcycle, same bike that Steve McQueen used in The Great Escape. By the way, he didn't make that one either. And his most famous motorcycle was the Harley XR 750, which he actually used to make a then record jump of 19 cars. But even though Mr. Knievel's life depended upon it, he wasn't particularly good at picking the cycle, as evidenced by the fact that he has a Guinness Book of World Records, 433 broken bones. But here's the one cycle theory. And I don't like squiggly lines, but this one tells us how it works. The one cycle theory is based on this. If you take a look at the light blue line, which is the unemployment rate, you then go above it and see the purple line, which is industrial, and the pink line, which is office. And that is almost perfect correlation. You don't have to be an economist to see that. That the vacancy rate in office and industrial is following unemployment. So maybe that's the only thing that matters, is the cycle. One cycle for all. Then you dig a little bit deeper. You go below that. You see that little green squiggly line there? That's the multifamily rate of vacancy. And you see, well, you know, it was pretty closely correlated from about 10 years ago, and then it seems to have separated. Multifamily is performing independent of the unemployment rate. And that has to do with things that there are more renters than buyers than there ever were before. So the one cycle theory may work, but it may not work. And then we have this thing known as the cycle monitor. Depending upon which city you are in, will have a different stage of the cycle. You'll see that just as the thing we showed you before, all of the tech cities are at or close to the top of the cycle, which includes San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, Boston. But you see the larger diversified cities are much further down. Los Angeles is sort of in that yellow area. If I were to put a place for Cleveland, I'd put Cleveland right there too. A diversified city that's still on its way up. But one of the things that Cleveland's doing today that I find very attractive, among other things, is you're taking a lot of the older Class B office stock and you're converting it into multifamily. I live in Baltimore. We're doing the same thing there. They're doing the same thing in a lot of older cities. Taking that old stock, making it better, making your existing stock better, also opening the door for new construction, which is a tremendous boom for the market. That is Janet Yellen, our head of the Fed. And interest rates is the stuff that people talk about a lot. Where are interest rates going seems to affect everything. Everybody saw what happened last Friday, where one of her subordinates, Eric Rosengren, the president of the Boston Fed, hinted that the Fed might raise interest rates sooner than people think, and the stock market tanked by 350 points. The 10-year yield went up by 12 basis points that day. So the market is really, really sensitive to interest rates. But of course, you're lucky that I'm here because I have all the answers. And I will tell you that I've been lecturing like this for the last 8 years, and every year I've lectured like this, I said, interest rates will be 100 basis points higher next year than they are this year. And I've been wrong 8 years in a row. Just like every other economist on the planet. But interest rates matter a lot, but they don't matter as much as people think for commercial real estate. If you remember about 3 years ago, there was something known as the taper tantrum, when the 10-year treasury went from about 2% to 3% from May through August of 2013. When that occurred, people said, uh-oh, that's the end of commercial real estate, cap rates are going to go to the moon, transaction volumes are going to slow down. Did not happen. Because there was too much equity capital flows coming in. Equity capital flows from foreign countries, from REITs, from other investors swamped the increase in the cost of debt capital. So that's why I am not worried about an increase in the cost of debt or from a real estate perspective, but I'm actually taking a position that I want the cost of debt to go up. Because the cost of debt isn't just the cost of capital, it is an indicator of global sentiment about growth and optimism. And optimism is the most important thing. How do I know that? I want everybody to take a closer look at that picture. Does anybody notice anything unusual about that picture? Let me give you a little bit of help. See that guy in the background with the thumbs up? That is no accident. If you YouTube this later when you're trying to check out evil people's jumps, YouTube the guy with thumbs up behind Janet Yellen in all of her pictures. And all of her public photographs, she either has a guy standing behind her with a thumbs up, or she herself has a thumbs up. Why? She believes in optimism. It's a little bit of probably of an inside joke with the Fed, but optimism is the thing that matters the most. Globalization. We talk about globalization, the winners and losers, but right now, globalization itself may be the big loser. This is an article that was in the Financial Times a couple days ago. The tide of globalization is turning, meaning globalization has slowed down. And Exhibit A is this South Korean shipping company called Hanjin, who went bankrupt 2 weeks ago. They went bankrupt 2 weeks ago because there is excess world capacity in ships, a ton of excess capacity. And then shipping companies wake up one day and says, oh, I'm going to build excess capacity. No. Shipping companies were too optimistic on how much global trade there was going to be. Global trade has slowed down. Why? Automation, folks. At its peak, the United States, Japan, and Germany had about 40% of our working population in some form of manufacturing. At its peak, China got to 15%, 15%. And now they're dropping. Why? Automation, reshoring. We are no longer seeing the need to ship out our manufacturing to places where labor is cheaper and it's coming back here and it's showing up in things like this. And this, folks, is a problem because since 1950, there have only been 2 years when global trade was slower than global GDP growth. 2009 during the Great Recession and last year. If this is a trend, it is a problem because it will hinder world growth. By the way, I pulled one of those crates off of the Hanjin boat and put it around the America. Is this retail? Everybody talks about retail being omni-channel, meaning you sell in the bricks and mortar store, then you sell on the internet. Well, omni-channel isn't the big story anymore for a very good reason. Nobody's making any money on the internet selling goods. Why aren't they making any money selling goods? Because margins have gotten squeezed to almost nothing. And there's a thing out there called reverse logistics. Anybody ever heard the term reverse logistics before? Well, when you buy goods at a regular bricks and mortar store, about 8% of those goods are returned. When you buy goods on the internet, people return up to 30% of those goods. Why is that a big deal? I'll tell you why it's a big deal. Because the minute you buy that lovely pair of shoes, take it out of the wrapper, decide to ship it back, you've destroyed almost all of its economic value. Because they then have to put it back in the box, find somebody else to buy it, may have gone out of fashion. How big of a problem is that? Last year, over 2 million tons of brand new goods were just thrown away. Because they couldn't deal with it. So you guys probably saw the recent announcement where Jet.com was purchased by Walmart. You know what Jet.com's, anybody bought Jet.com? About $3 billion. You know what Jet.com's big innovation was, other than matching bulk buyers and bulk sellers? They make customers waive their right to return goods. They figured out that that is where all the money is being lost. Okay, people, you thought I was making this up, right? You thought I was going to just do this thing all up here for the next couple of hours, and I wasn't going to call you out of there, but you folks were wrong. Because we're going to have what's known as lightning round here, where I'm going to call up some random people in the audience. Hopefully you're out there. And what I do is ask a question. Some people head to the exit. I'm chasing this guy out. I ask you a question, and the way that it works is I give you a word, and you can come back to me with any 2 words you want. I, of course, can answer with anything because I'm the guy up here with the microphone. Is everybody ready here? Hopefully some of these people are here. If they're not here, calling out regular. Everybody else. Neil Vinyl? We have a Neil Vinyl. Vinny. How about Neil Vinny? Just stepped out. That was Neil Vinny right there. All right, what's your name, sir?
I'm Jeff Scott.
Jeff Scott.
I'm not Neil.
You're not Neil. I know you're not Neil, because that's more than 2 words, Jeff. Just because they called it out randomly. It's like Simon Says. Okay, look at it. You ready? Yeah. Interest rates. Going up, going down, bad, good. What did the boys do?
No clue.
No clue. No clue. Well, you know what? That's actually the best answer I've got. The reason is, because as I said when I was up there on stage, I've been talking about interest rates for the last 8 years, and I've been wrong 8 years in a row. I'd like to see them go up. Don't see them going up. And the reason I don't see them going up is because there are very few drivers of optimism out there that are going to make them drive. What are the drivers of, by the way, just for the record, Jeff, you were second on the list. Wasn't staged. Okay. Wasn't staged. But we have an Adam Hill in the audience. Not here, but we do have a Neil Evers here. Another Neil. See that? Still 2 words, man. I'm still sticking with this stuff. You know, it's a New York guy taking advantage of the people. Come on, you gotta give it right back. All right. So the cycle. Where are we in the cycle? How much further are we going to have to grow? We're going to go on for another couple of years, couple of months, go on forever. What do you think? 2 years. Oh, that's fantastic. That was sort of our prediction up there. I like that. Well, you know, I'll tell you what. Recessions are a bad thing. Right? The Great Recession was awful. The cost is still being felt today, not only in psychology, but the economy has never grown faster. But I will say this. I actually hope we have a recession in a couple of years, rather than be where we are today. Where we are today is in a bad place. We have somewhere between 1.5% and 2.25% growth indefinitely, which is this never, never land where people don't know what to do and the market is never cleared. How long will we be in this never, never land? Australia hasn't had a recession in 25 years. Japan hasn't grown in 25 years. It's a bad place. And so when I started lecturing like this, I was running our restructuring practice at CBRE. I was dealing with all the big banks and governments that are. And there was a program that came out called TARP. You guys remember TARP and PIP and TALP and all those funny little acronyms? Well, TARP was originally designed to buy the bad assets and then sell it. Then, literally, a day after it came out, oh, you know, I don't think that's a good idea. I think we're just going to put the money into the banks and save them, and they can just entomb these assets. And that's exactly what happened. We never cleared the market after the Great Recession. And you think it's bad here? You should see it in Italy. In Italy, 18% of their loans are not performing. 18%, right? It's danger zone here in the United States if we get above 2%. So not clearing is a bad thing. I don't wish a recession. I'd rather have that than this. Globalization. Globalization seems to be slowing down. A good thing, bad thing, globalization, what are changing? Hello, what's your name? Hello, Stephanie. How are you doing today? So, Stephanie, I'm still playing the game here. I'm still messing with two words here. All right, so globalization is a good thing, a bad thing. Obviously, a controversial issue in places like Cleveland and Ohio, the heavy manufacturing business. Maybe both. Maybe both. I think that's an excellent answer, too. I like that, because you know what? I think it is both. Because I think long-term, we're better off with globalization and automation that helps people grow faster. But short-term, and I hate to say it, we are not. And if you go back to this book that I just read, or I put up on the screen, it talks about all the great things about globalization already. It doesn't talk about what do we do with people that lose their jobs? What do we do about manufacturing? And his answers are the same answers you hear from everybody else. It's education, or it's minimum living wage. You hear about that thing over in Norway when they give everybody a $25,000 annual check to not work, right? There's one word that's not in that book, and it bothered me. That word is dignity. Is that the average worker's dignity is considered something that could be just frittered away, and I don't like that. So I agree with you. Both answers are right. Long term, we're better off, but over the short term, we need to deal with that issue. Okay, a couple more slides here. Anybody know why I have this slide of these 3 people up on the screen? First of all, Dave, that was Dave actually only about 5 years ago. Isn't that right? Dave? Right there? You know, that was There we go, a little bit better. So, still look like that. You're still there. The reason why I put it up there is because the key word that we have in commercial real estate today isn't rent. People don't chase markets because they're cheaper. That is one reason they chase markets. The most important reason they chase markets is because of the talent. They want to get closer to the talent. So when we polled the Fortune 500 companies, and we represent most of them, they said the most important reason to come to a market is to find the best talent pool. Number one reason, which is why I kept harping on places like Cleveland State, East Coast Reserve, etc. But once they're in the market, real estate costs matter. So talent is what's driving most people's markets. Now, it's not every industry. Okay, if you go to tech and telecom, skilled labor shortage is by far their biggest concern. But if you're in the banking industry, it's tighter regulation that's the biggest problem. When we were meeting with the Fed was nervous about where we are in the market because at the end of the first quarter, we had $1.8 trillion of commercial real estate loans outstanding, which is a new record. And they started squeezing. And where they're squeezing, if anybody's here in the construction business, you will know it's a whole lot harder to get a construction loan today than it was a year ago because the Fed is squeezing. Tighter regulation. It's not just the Fed squeezing, but there's some other new laws that are coming into place, including Dodd-Frank and Basel III, which are restricting the banks. So not just talent, it's also regulation depending upon your industry. What is most important to your employees? We did a poll recently for the same Fortune 500 companies. We said, well, what do you want the most, employee? And what came out most, in addition to being close to their partners, is flexibility. Employees want the ability to work on their own schedule, at their own pace. And there are certain amenities that matter, including gyms and water coolers and things like that. And indoor environmental quality. You know, I did a session like this about 7 years ago in Phoenix, and I had up on a table just like this the largest real estate owners in the United States. And I asked them all a question 7 years ago. I said, has the economic case been made to make environmentally sensitive changes to your building? To a person, they all said no. That was 7 years ago. Today, they would all say yes. Why? Because that is what the employees are demanding. That is what tenants are demanding. It may save you a couple of bucks not to put it in, but you're not going to get the right quality of people if you do that. Public transport, infrastructure is another big one. Infrastructure is another big one. Infrastructure, and it was talked about in the prior panel briefly, there's two types of infrastructure. One type of infrastructure is transportation infrastructure, and that is roads, buses, trains, planes, etc. And interestingly, the big cities do better than that and do some of these emerging hot markets. Infrastructure is really important. There's one other piece of infrastructure that I consider more important, but right back to the theme that we talked about before. And that other piece of infrastructure is schools. Okay? Schools. If you do not have good schools, and I'm not talking just colleges, I'm talking about elementary schools, people are going to leave the center cities. We're talking about all the densification, about younger folks moving downtown. They're going to leave when they start having families because not everybody can afford or get their kids into private schools. So that's a big deal. But the thing about all these things, flexibility, and even some of the amenities, I'll give a story. I was just out in Silicon Valley a couple weeks ago, and I met with the largest tech companies in the world. Went to their workplaces. And what was the one thing I saw in every one of their workplaces? So sound funny at first, but work with bigger people. Or bars, full bars, like with alcohol right in the middle of the work floor. In fact, in one of these workplaces, they had 40 taps. I mean, literally, right in the lunchroom, of all local beer and wine. And I contrasted that. So when I was coming home that evening, I went to the airport, went to the bar, and the guy carded me. I said, well, that's great. I'm 46 years old. I consider that a compliment. And then he carded the guy standing next to me who was about 75 years old. And I thought to myself, you know what? There's something up here. What it said to me was that the boss of this bartender didn't trust him or wasn't allowed to trust him to do something that was obvious. By contrast, the boss of the people that were in the workplaces in Silicon Valley, their bosses trusted them to do something responsible. Not a single person there was drinking, by the way. Who was there if you wanted it, just like the yoga room, just like the ping pong table, the basketball. It's all about trusting your employees, and they'll be better off. And that's the same thing that seems to be lost. the employer of that bartender in that airport was taking away that employee's dignity. And it's the same thing that we're seeing today during this transition period to automation. Every time I see that, I hope for a different outcome. I know we have some students in the room here today, so I thought I'd give you a couple of tips which I hope you find interesting, and for everybody else, hopefully they resonate with you as well. I get asked a lot of how do I do what I do today, how to get here, what are some things that motivate me. So here's the first one. My grandfather was a New York City cab driver, and I mention that because I had this job in a big company, speaking about the economy, and respect to me is something that's very important. And my definition of respect comes from this, because you try to treat everybody you meet exactly the same. Treat everybody, the CEO or the lowest level person, exactly the same. It's a value that's gotten me through a lot. Now, it's not the same thing in other cultures. I've been to Japan, and there it's much more hierarchical. You have to treat the boss in a different way than you treat the more supportive folks. Here in the United States, respect is a value that I hold quite dearly. This is my grandmother, Beth. She's 99 years old. And grit is the characteristic that she reminds me of. There was a terrific book that came out recently by Angela Duckworth. It's called Grit. And I strongly encourage you to read it, because it talks about this being the most important characteristic to succeed over the long term. Now, in an incredible coincidence, I was at a board meeting last night in Baltimore. I'm on the board of a school called the Baltimore Leadership School for Young Women, which is an all-girls school in the University of Baltimore. And, I'm sure the issues there are not dissimilar to some of the issues you face here. But the principal of the school said that Angela Duckworth herself came and evaluated the Baltimore City schools. And she said, and this is straight out of the meeting, grit's not good enough. The system there was so flawed, so weak, that they didn't have the infrastructure that grit was going to get through that. And I tried to, it struck me, and it took me back to my own career. What is it going to take to be successful? And you can be gritty, you can suck it up when things get tough, but you have to have a good system in place to build for success in the future. So the single best thing that ever happened to me, or one of the best things that ever happened to me professionally, was when I was transitioning from being a lawyer in New York to being an investment banker. And I thought, coming from New York, I knew it all. My boss said, son, you don't know anything. And so for 2 years, he stuck me in a cube, and I underwrote deal after deal, so I learned my craft. So grit has helped me for years, knowing my craft, and taking a step back is something that mattered a lot as well. The most important thing of all, and I talked about this before, is you. Because you make your own choices, and I encourage all of you to stay optimistic, notwithstanding all this noise in the political race and some of the issues we've got to here. Optimism is the answer. Having a positive outlook, not just making yourself personally happier. It will make the economy run better if people are more optimistic. Remember, one person with courage is a majority. I hope that's you. Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned we're fortunate here. We've got good schools, we've got good health care, good infrastructure. I was thinking about our location being sort of tucked away in the market. You mentioned reading about weather and the changing weather and how it's going to affect the coastal cities, New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Boston. One day, could that benefit or improve us here because of, people necessarily didn't
things. First, we wrote a paper on global warming and its impact on coastal cities, and you're correct that in addition to the infrastructure being built there, the insurance costs can become very costly and that's very dangerous to live there. If we get superstorms and things like that because of that. But it's not dissimilar to what we're suggesting about the town. Over the long term, we're better off with that. During the transition period between now and when things are more automated, not so good. And so I guess the only thing I would say to you is, how long is the long game? John Maynard Keynes said, the long run, we're all dead. I think it's going to be too long to realistically suggest that cities that are in a northern climate are going to be better off simply because of global warming. And I would point to a couple of cities that are in northern climate that are doing quite well today. One city I'll point to is Minneapolis. Minneapolis is a live, workplace city, notwithstanding the fact that it is really, really cold there. People like to get outside and do things there. But also Minneapolis has a lot of things. Minneapolis is a great Grace, the same Grace. The University of Minnesota sitting right in the middle of a major city. They're also the greenest city in America based on our own sustainability index. So I wouldn't wait around for global warming for Cleveland to turn the corner. I would say start making some of the changes that other successful cities are making. Yes, sir.
As you may know, the 44105 was the epicenter of the housing and foreclosure crisis that right here in Slaughter Village. Do you see, as that also being epicenter, we also Cleveland is not a city earlier than other parts of the country. You had stated roughly about 2 years before 18 that we're potentially looking at another recession. What industry do you see as being the culprit cause of that? Are you foreseeing another housing bubble as being the culprit, or is there another industry that potentially?
I would say it's not going to be a housing bubble because even though there was a good rebound here in Cleveland, I saw the same thing in houses actually stronger on a percentage basis. Housing is very weird in terms of new construction on a national basis. In fact, we're about half the number of units that we build today versus what we were at the peak. And when we get back to peak, in 1931 we had peak number of single-family housing built at that point in time. They didn't get back to peak again until 1950, 3 years. It could be the same thing here nationally. And also we didn't level ourselves into living. I can show you stats where single-family and commercial did not be the same level of that. So I would say if I was to point to one industry, we're inside the energy industry, where we've already seen cities like Houston, Pittsburgh, Denver suffer a bit. I think the investors are voting on the tech industry. Right? I'm not saying there's going to be